The pressure hull gave a low, agonizing groan at 3,000 feet, and this time, the sound was personal. It wasn't the rhythmic complaint of steel under expected stress. It was the sharp, panicked intake of breath from a massive, multimillion-dollar machine suddenly realizing its own mortality. The submersible Triton V, an engineering marvel built to explore the impossible, was now nothing more than a rapidly descending metal casket, choked by the crushing, perpetual darkness of the abyssal zone. Inside the control room, the emergency red lights cast long, demonic shadows over the faces of the crew, illuminating a stark terror that transcended professional training. The absolute silence, no communication, no propulsion hum, no digital data stream, was the loudest sound they had ever heard, screaming the undeniable truth. They were alone, and the deep was winning. Before we plummet further into this nightmare, remember to subscribe for more impossible true stories, and tell us, what secret talent are you hiding that could save a life? Dr. Alistair Finch, the chief engineer, a man whose entire identity was welded to the perfection of his calculations, felt his stomach drop faster than the vessel. Finch, in his late 30s, was a textbook genius, holding 3 advanced degrees. He was also a monument to modern intellectual arrogance, a man who sincerely believed that any problem not solvable by a spreadsheet was fundamentally beneath him. His condescension towards Eli Thorne, the quiet, 71-year-old custodian who was the only man not panicking, was a reflection of his own deep-seated insecurity. Finch's father, a blue-collar shipyard welder, had always been overshadowed by engineers, a slight Finch vowed to avenge by making his knowledge utterly untouchable. He viewed Eli's simple existence as an insult to the complexity of his own hard-won expertise. The irony, a cold and bitter twist of fate, was that Finch's very inability to look past the mop was about to doom them all. Eli sat in the tiny galley, his movements slow and deliberate, a profound act of stillness in the chaos. He didn't rush. He didn't pray. He simply finished wiping down the counter. His calmness wasn't bravery. It was muscle memory honed over a lifetime of high-stakes, underwater solitude. Eli's past was an unwritten tragedy, a sonar technician master chief whose career ended not with glory, but with a traumatic event involving a failed acoustic filter decades ago that cost him his rank and forced him into deep, quiet civilian obscurity. He carried the weight of that failure, the loss of life attributed, unfairly, he knew, to a technical failure he couldn't fix quickly enough. His subsequent obsessive simulator training wasn't a hobby. It was a decades-long penance, a vow that he would never again be caught unprepared when the machine failed. The initial failure had been so subtle, so brief, that only Eli's trained eye had caught it. The first flicker of the lead, the faint, high-pitched 12 kilohertz hum that signaled a surge in the primary power converters, a signature that shouldn't exist. Now, the main control displays were dead, the 3 redundant power systems fried by a catastrophic, cascading geothermal surge, a 1-in-a-million event that acted like a focused electromagnetic pulse to their digital brains. They were inert. They were sinking. And the emergency batteries, the final thread to life, were screaming their distress silently. Status. Give me a depth. Captain Ramirez, the vessel's commander, demanded, her face pale. She was a surface officer, trained in dealing with visible threats like storms and ice. The absolute, crushing blackness of the abyss was a terror her training had never addressed. Chief Engineer Vance, who had replaced Finch for this shift, was sweating profusely, frantically trying to reroute power through systems that no longer existed. The main depth gauge is offline. The backup pressure sensor is offline. The digital compass is reading gibberish. We have no trim, no ballast control, no propulsion. We're sinking at an estimated rate of 25 feet per minute, Captain. We need an accurate depth reading now, or we will pass crush depth. The scientists began shouting, their fear ripping through the professional veneer. A geophysicist was screaming about the hull's theoretical limits. A marine biologist was crying silently into his hands. Anya, the young sonar technician, was defeated, staring at a screen that was vomiting only raw, meaningless acoustic data, a deluge of noise without the digital filters to make sense of it. They were deaf, blind, and plunging toward the fracture zone Eli had only moments ago heard whispering in the ship's metal. The vessel lurched violently, and a sharp, metallic crack echoed through the hull, not a rupture, but a catastrophic stress fracture near the aft torpedo tubes. The sound alone was enough to make half the crew physically recoil. Damage report. Ramirez screamed. It's structural. The secondary pressure boundary is compromised. We just accelerated our descent. We are now sinking at 35 feet per minute. Vance yelled, his voice laced with pure panic. Captain, we have to jettison the external research packages. It's the only way to lighten the load and regain positive buoyancy. Dr. Finch, now back in the control room, his face a mask of furious concentration, seized the manual release override for the research packages. He's right. We have to lighten the load. The $20 million samples are expendable. We execute the emergency jettison now. Wait. The single, calm word, delivered without a hint of fear or urgency, came from Eli, still standing patiently by the galley. He held a small, polished brass key he had retrieved from his cleaning cat, the key to the obsolete, purely mechanical depth gauge secured in a redundant bulkhead cabinet. Chief Finch, Chief Vance, Eli said, his gentle eyes focused intensely on the two engineers. The hull fracture is aft. If you jettison the payload now, the sudden positive pressure release on the upper part of the hull will induce a catastrophic torsional twist at the fracture point. You'll rip the hull apart. You must maintain pressure stability first. Finch stared at him, his face a roadmap of condescension melting into fury. Who the hell are you to override the emergency protocols, Janitor? I built the algorithm that governs that jettison sequence. The physics dictate a rapid pressure release is required to offset the negative buoyancy. The physics of the deep dictate patience, Chief, Eli countered, stepping forward and holding up the brass key. The manual ballast pumps are not strong enough to overcome the inertia of this collapse. The key is in the precise, slow venting of the internal water tanks while simultaneously offsetting the payload mass. But first, you must know your depth precisely to calculate the water column's mass density coefficient. Eli walked straight to the secured cabinet, inserted the key, and opened the antique brass door, revealing a heavy, industrial-grade mechanical depth gauge, a purely analog instrument that relied on a precise diaphragm and a series of coiled springs. The gauge was bathed in the sickly red emergency light, its large needle quivering. Depth, Eli read calmly, his eyes unblinking, committing the number to memory. 3,240 feet. Vance checked his battery-powered pressure readout, which was still wildly oscillating but occasionally catching the static depth. It read 3,245 feet. The obsolete mechanical gauge was more accurate than the broken digital sensor. The sight of the janitor, the man who cleaned their spilled coffee, solving their most critical technical dilemma with an old key, shattered the engineer's pride. Captain Ramirez saw the hesitation, the fatal flaw in the expertise of the young men. She made the decision that separated a captain from a passenger. Mr. Finch, Mr. Vance, you are relieved of technical command. Mr. Thorne, you have the con of the hull integrity system. You will guide us. The life of every soul on board now rests on your knowledge of the abyss. Eli nodded, accepting the impossible burden. He turned his attention not to the depth, but to the young, shell-shocked sonar technician, Anya. Miss, I need your station. And I need those headphones. I'm going to teach you to speak the language of the metal. Eli Thorne moved to the sonar station, his movement a strange blend of the janitor's quiet efficiency and the Master Chief's profound authority. He ignored the dead digital screens and plunged his attention into the raw, analog output. He placed the military-grade headphones over his ears. The moment the sound rushed in, the terrifying symphony of the deep, he closed his eyes and became a statue. He was listening not just for external objects, but for the ship itself. He was listening to the high-frequency shudder of the aft fracture, the low-frequency 4 Hz hum of the abyssal current attempting to tear the hull laterally, and the terrifying whoosh of water resistance against their descent. Captain, Eli's voice was the only stable thing in the control room. The sheer face of the fracture zone is now 6 minutes away. We must stop the drift and change vector. We need a slow, controlled shift of the center of mass to catch the current. We have no propulsion, sir. The rudders are useless against the current. Finch cried out, his voice a frantic mixture of fear and professional indignation. The main rudders are useless, Chief, Eli corrected gently, without opening his eyes. But the emergency trim tabs, designed for minute adjustments to buoyancy, still have residual power from the failing battery pack. They are only designed to work at 0 speed, but we are being dragged at 4 knots by a powerful abyssal current, the Hades flow. I can use the tabs like a hydrofoil rudder, deflecting the water column to shift our hull angle by precisely 3 degrees to catch the crossflow. It was an insane idea, using minute stabilization fins, designed for precise leveling, as a makeshift rudder on a sinking, inert vessel. It was intuitive physics so advanced it was rendered obsolete by computers. Eli guided Vance to the manual override for the trim tabs. Vance, I need a 3-degree deflection on the starboard trim tab. Hold it for exactly 40 seconds. Do not exceed 3.5 degrees, or the turbulence will tear the small actuator from the hull. Vance, now humbled and desperate, followed the instruction, his hands moving with agonizing care. Eli listened, his face impassive, his entire concentration focused on the sound of the water reacting against the metal. After 40 seconds, Eli commanded, hold. Stabilized. We have shifted the vector. The Hades flow is now pushing our port side north. We will clear the fracture zone. We bought ourselves 10 minutes, but the structural integrity is failing. The realization hit the crew with sickening force. They were not safe. They had merely delayed the inevitable. The tension in the room ratcheted up another notch. They had solved the impossible drift, only to discover the problem of the failing hull. Eli continued to listen to the hull, the vessel now slowly, agonizingly being pushed away from the fracture zone by the sheer power of the deep-sea current. But the reprieve came with a new, terrifying soundtrack. Captain, Eli announced, his voice tight. The stress fracture aft is now a microfracture. I hear the high-frequency 15 Hz ping of water entering the hull at a molecular level. It's slow, but it's there. We are taking on water in the aft section, compromising the seals. And it's only going to accelerate as we drop deeper. This was the ultimate cliffhanger, not a catastrophic breach, but a slow, silent, invisible leak that would eventually lead to implosion. The problem wasn't escaping the abyss. The problem was surviving the escape. How long, Mr. Thorne? How long until the water compromises the auxiliary buoyancy tanks? Ramirez asked, her voice cracking with the strain of leadership. Eli performed a complex, instantaneous calculation based on the volume of the 15 Hz signature against the known pressure. If we maintain this depth, we have approximately 4 to 5 minutes before the pressure on the compromised seal causes a rapid, catastrophic breach. We must ascend, and we must do it immediately, before the emergency batteries fail completely. But we can't ascend. The ballast is too heavy, and the pumps are dead. Finch wailed, his scientific certainty useless against the raw terror of the deep. We will use the abyssal current for the initial lift, Eli declared, his gaze fixed on the sonar panel. I heard another thermal signature, a geothermal vent plume, 500 meters above and to the northwest. That plume is pushing up a superheated column of water, creating a vertical current powerful enough to lift a vessel this size. It's a natural elevator, but we have to be moving north to catch it. The plan was utterly insane. Ride a hot, unstable column of water created by a volcanic vent to the surface. It was a maneuver only possible under conditions of absolute, desperate failure. Eli turned to Anya, the young sonar technician. Miss, you need to hear this. Put on the secondary set of headphones. I need you to listen to the 15 Hz signature of the water leak. If that signature accelerates, if the frequency jumps, you tell me immediately. That is the sound of our death. Anya, her face tear-streaked but resolute, placed the headphones on. She looked at the old man, the janitor, the only one who seemed to understand the code of the abyss. She was now part of the most high-stakes sonar team in history. The ascent was a slow-motion nightmare. Eli guided Vance in precise deflections of the trim tabs, maneuvering the inert vessel north, toward the silent promise of the vent plume. Anya, her small hands trembling, listened with terrifying concentration to the ping of the water leak. Every minute was stretched into an hour. Eli began whispering instructions, his voice low and rhythmic, like a sea shanty. Vance, a half-degree port. Hold. Anya, the frequency. Still 15 Hz, Mr. Thorne. Stable. Good. Vance, starboard trim tab, 1 degree. Hold. We are entering the thermal envelope now. Captain, the hull will groan now. Do not panic. It is just the metal adjusting to the heat. The hull shrieked, a high-pitched metallic howl that made everyone cover their ears. They could feel the unnatural heat of the rising plume pushing against the hull, heating the water outside. It was a terrifying, violent surge, but the vessel was slowly, miraculously, beginning to rise. Ascent rate is accelerating. We're rising at 60 feet per minute. Finch screamed, checking the mechanical gauge. It's working. We're climbing. But the joy was instantly swallowed by a new problem. Anya's small body stiffened. She ripped the headphones off, her eyes wide with terror. Mr. Thorne. The frequency. It jumped to 25 Hz. The leak is accelerating. The seal is failing under the combined stress of the pressure drop and the unnatural heat of the plume. We don't have 30 minutes. Eli's face, for the first time, showed a flicker of fear. The internal siege was compounding the external peril. He knew the failure of the hull was now irreversible. They had to be lighter. Vance, Finch, jettison the research payload now. Eli roared, his quiet voice replaced by the hard edge of a Master Chief giving the final command. We must achieve maximum positive buoyancy immediately. Release the main payload. Release the auxiliary stabilizing packages. Dump everything. The engineers followed the command without question, their earlier arrogance replaced by absolute, terrified obedience. The vessel shook violently as the heavy external packages were jettisoned, a massive sigh of relief echoing through the hull as the weight was released. The vessel surged upward, riding the thermal current like a rocket. But the leak was still accelerating. At 2,000 feet, the emergency life support batteries began to fail. The red lights dimmed to a weak, sickly orange. Time had run out. They were flying blind on the final, desperate ascent, their last hope of power fading into the dark. The last 2,000 feet were pure darkness and terror. Eli, his eyes now open, relied on the residual pressure differential and the feel of the hull against the rising current. He was the sentinel, the final sensor. We are passing 1,000 feet, Captain. The hull is still holding. The pressure difference is slowing the leak, but the seal is compromised. We will surface. And then, with a jarring whoosh, the vessel breached the surface. Daylight, blinding, beautiful, and utterly overwhelming, flooded the control room. The hull groaned one last time, a sigh of profound relief, and then the massive submersible floated inertly on the waves. They were alive. The subsequent scenes were a blur of frantic activity. The surface vessel, having tracked their improbable ascent via the geothermal plume's thermal signature, was immediately there. As the hatch was opened, the crew poured out, gasping for air, collapsing onto the deck. Eli Thorne was the last one out, climbing the ladder slowly, his old muscles weary but his eyes clear. Vance and Finch met him on the deck, their faces stained with tears and seawater. Vance snapped a perfect, rigid salute. "Mr. Thorne, you saved us. I don't know how you did it, sir. That was the most brilliant act of acoustic physics I have ever witnessed. You are a genius." Eli simply smiled, dusting off his denim sleeve. "I just listened to the machine, son. You have to listen to the silence." Then, the Admiral arrived, having been flown to the recovery vessel by helicopter. He was the most senior naval officer present, and his eyes were fixed solely on Eli Thorne. He walked up to Eli, ignored the saluting crew, and spoke with a reverence that silenced the entire recovery operation. "Elijah," the Admiral said, using Eli's full name, a sign of historical respect. "I knew that sonic signature. The precision. The stillness. I heard the story of the Triton vs Impossible ascent. No one has mastered the passive acoustic return like that since you left the service. That technique, using the heat plume and the trim tabs to correct the drift, that was the Sentinel maneuver." The Admiral reached out a hand, not for a handshake, but for a gesture of profound respect. "Welcome back, Master Chief Elijah Thorne. We thought you were lost to history. We thought the Ghost Whisperer was a myth we invented to scare the young sonar techs. You didn't just save a vessel, you saved a legacy. We decommissioned that specific hull 25 years ago because we thought the acoustic filter failed. We now know, thanks to your actions, that the filter was never the problem. It was the listening that failed." Vance, Finch, and the entire crew stared. Their janitor was not just a genius. He was an enshrined legend, a mythical figure who had returned from obscurity to save them using the very skills they had deemed useless. The debriefing was not a formality, it was an education. Over the next 6 months, the Ghost Whisperer became the most sought-after consultant in naval and deep-sea engineering. Eli used his influence not for personal wealth or fame, but to dismantle the culture of arrogance he had witnessed. He forced the Triton V engineers, especially Vance and Finch, to rebuild the sonar station with redundant analog components, ensuring that the machine would never again rely solely on the digital brain. He instituted the Sentinel's discipline, a mandatory 6-month training period for all incoming engineers, requiring them to sit blindfolded at the sonar station, listening only to the raw data, learning to distinguish the subtle language of the metal. Vance and Finch, humbled and transformed, became Eli's first disciples. Vance, the prideful engineer, spent a year working in the engine bay, learning the precise sound of a clean-running motor. Finch, the arrogant theorist, spent months in the sonar room, learning to distinguish a 12 Hz thermal warp from a 15 Hz microfracture. They stopped relying on the numbers and started relying on their intuition. They learned that knowledge is useless without the humility to listen. Anya, the young technician, became the true heir to the legacy. She absorbed Eli's knowledge like a sponge, developing an innate acoustic intuition that surpassed even her master chiefs. She became the new sentinel, ensuring the wisdom was passed on. One quiet afternoon, years later, Eli sat in a perfectly restored acoustic simulator with Vance and Finch, now respected, compassionate leaders. "I'm going home now, boys," Eli said, his voice soft. "My time is up. The deep is quiet. The mission is complete." "We'll never forget what you taught us, Master Chief," Vance said, his voice thick with genuine emotion. "You taught us that the most important instrument in the control room is a quiet mind." Eli smiled, the beautiful, knowing smile of a man who had finally made peace with his past. He looked at the two young men who had once dismissed him. "The deep doesn't care about your degrees, sons. It cares about your stillness. I am proud of the men you've become. Now go. You have a legacy to maintain." He walked out, leaning slightly on his cane, the ghost whisperer dissolving back into the warmth of the surface world, ready to spend his remaining years with his wife, far away from the crushing silence of the abyss. He proved that true power isn't in domination or control, but in the quiet, humble mastery of the self. The janitor who saved the world. The sound of the automatic hangar door sliding shut behind Eli Thorne was not loud, but in the newly renovated Triton V Control Center, it resonated like a final, solemn chord. Vance and Finch, now senior engineers with the humility of acolytes, did not move. They stood by the gleaming, newly installed Whisperer's array, watching the empty space where the Master Chief had stood. The silence he left was heavier, more profound, than the mechanical noise of a sinking submarine. It was the silence of a void, a massive, quiet space where pure, intuitive expertise had resided. Vance slowly lowered his hand, his posture reflecting the discipline Eli had instilled. "He's gone," he whispered, the words feeling too large for the suddenly empty room. "He taught us how to hear the ocean, but he didn't teach us how to fill the quiet when he leaves." Finch nodded, his eyes fixed on the brass depth gauge, the physical artifact of Eli's impossible triumph. "He taught us what to listen for, Vance. Not who to listen to. That's the legacy. We have to be the stillness now." Finch stepped up to the massive, sound-dampened console of the Whisperer's array. It was running a diagnostic, a simple, automated cycle that produced a low, predictable hum. He reached out and gently placed his fingers on the control surface, then closed his eyes, mimicking the precise, closed-eye posture Eli had used to navigate the abyss. He wasn't looking at the numbers. He was feeling the vibration, searching for the truth beneath the static. The mission, however, was not immediately complete. Eli's departure left a tangible, operational gap that the organization was desperate to fill. The Naval Command had tried to assign a replacement, a high-ranking, decorated digital warfare specialist, who arrived the following morning with 3 briefcases full of data chips and an air of detached arrogance that instantly set Vance's teeth on edge. The specialist, Captain Elias Shaw, a man who saw the sea only as a collection of binary variables, looked at the brass depth gauge with open contempt. "What is this relic? An antique. This should be replaced with a holographic display. And this Whisperer's array. All those analog knobs are a drain on efficiency. We're deep-sea explorers, not Cold War radio operators. I operate on data integrity, not on superstition or some janitor's intuition." Vance and Finch exchanged a look that spoke volumes, a perfect, silent communication born of shared terror and shared salvation. Vance stepped forward, his voice low and firm, echoing the calm authority of his mentor. "Captain Shaw, with all due respect, that relic saved 162 lives when your data integrity failed completely. The analog array is non-negotiable. If you intend to command this vessel, you will familiarize yourself with the Sentinel's discipline." The tension in the control room was instantaneous and absolute, a confrontation between the new, digital arrogance and the hard-won, analog humility. Shaw scoffed, but the absolute, unified authority of the 2 young engineers, the very men who had been humbled and rebuilt by Eli, was unshakable. The legacy of the Ghost Whisperer was not a set of manuals. It was a powerful, ethical consensus that now governed the most advanced vessel in the fleet. They had absorbed not just the technique, but the moral code. Eli, meanwhile, had truly walked away. He hadn't just retired, he had retreated. He and his wife relocated to a small, quiet coastal town where the only pressure was the ebb and flow of the tide. He spent his days in his small workshop, no longer practicing on simulators, but crafting intricate, silent models of deep-sea flora and fauna. His hands, the hands that had guided a $500 million submarine, now focused on delicate, painstaking work, a final act of seeking stillness. Yet, he could never entirely escape the abyss. He carried the residual noise, the high-pitched ringing in his ears from the accelerated microfracture tones. Sometimes, late at night, when the house was quiet, he would close his eyes, and instead of the gentle rhythm of the ocean outside, he would hear the terrifying, accelerating 25 Hz ping of the water rushing into the collapsing hull. It was the sound of his ultimate success, but also the physical price of his extraordinary knowledge. His wife, sensing the quiet anxiety, would gently touch his shoulder. He would open his eyes, look at her, and the terror would recede, replaced by the profound peace of the surface world he had fought so hard to return to. The true continuation of Eli Thorne's story was not in the abyss, but in the silent, powerful transformation of the people and the technology he left behind. He was a silent, living architect of change, a ghost who ensured the next generation would never repeat the mistakes of the past. The ghost whisperer was retired, but his wisdom was now embedded in the deep. His legacy was a new, humble generation of explorers who knew, without question, that the most important truth about the abyss could never be found on a screen, but only in the quiet, focused space between their own heartbeats. If this epic story of humility and impossible knowledge touched your soul, hit that notification bell and share this with anyone who needs to remember that the greatest heroes are often the ones cleaning up the mess. The deep is dark, but the human spirit is the brightest light. Stay safe, stay humble, and always, always listen to the metal.